Recently, I made a video about the various crimes that Gregory commits during the events of FNAF Security Breach, and for some reason, the video that is clearly meant to be satire, since, you know, none of it is real and doesn't really matter, still got a lot of people mad. So in the interest of those people who had a hard time believing what Gregory was doing is wrong, this video is for you. Today we discuss if Gregory is really a criminal based on everything we see in Security Breach, and see what the possible repercussions would be, if any. Okay, let's do it. Now, based on the points I made last time, there are a few things that we need to go over. Firstly, the breaking and entering does not apply in the actual game, but can come into play later on. He is 100% trespassing though, despite being locked inside. He actively hid inside of Freddy, like in his stomach, instead of leaving the Pizzaplex, which would make this trespassing. Every time I mention stealing, like in the merch, the security badges, even Freddy, there's no arguing that. He does in fact steal those. The main argument against these is that, well, he needs to do this to survive, which is blatantly not true. Okay, Freddy informs Gregory that the doors will reopen at 6 AM. All Gregory needs to do at that point is just stay in Freddy's green room or the area behind it until 6. Nothing else was necessary in order for him to survive. The only problems occur when Gregory tries to get out sooner. He causes his own problems. Vanny only ends up knowing Gregory is in the Lost and Found because she put him there as Vanessa. So, with that logic in mind, Vanny would not have known that Gregory was in Freddy or Freddy's green room. He says that himself. And Vanessa does not check inside Freddy when you approach her while piloting him. So as far as the argument that he needed to do this to survive, no he didn't. Unless he ends up making the problems himself, which would completely destroy his case. So, glad we got that settled. One of the other points of contention was really everything else he did was in self-defense. He had to destroy the animatronics. He had to kill Vanny in the phaser blast ending, otherwise they would have killed him. But while self-defense does sometimes justify killing in order to protect yourself or your loved ones, this is typically used for human-on-human interactions. Human-on-robot interactions wouldn't necessarily fall under self-defense. The animatronics would have to be proven that they didn't intend to harm Gregory, and this could be done using code analysis and camera footage. However, we know that the animatronics were hacked, and whoever Client 46 is did the hacking. Now, if Client 46 is Gregory, which in the context of this world they would know, and the evidence seems to actually point to, the fact that the animatronics were after him could be seen as his fault, since he actually disturbed their original programming. This is also where the footage of him in the Pizzaplex would have come out, particularly the image where he was talking to someone with rabbit ears, thus showing the jury that Gregory and Vanny had a personal relationship, further hurting his case. Gregory by no means had to destroy the animatronics. He chose to do it. Freddy even asks him not to. Gregory didn't do it because he had to, he did it because he wanted revenge. He even says it himself, quote, "They get what they deserve." He was destroying them for revenge and to get the parts for Freddy, not so that they wouldn't hurt him, since after all they can still come and kill him after he destroys them. So he does destroy property because he wanted the animatronics to suffer, not because he had to in order to be safe again. Again, could have just hid in Freddy's room or somewhere else. People are also saying that he's homeless, so he has to steal. Firstly, homeless or not, it's still illegal to steal. And secondly, I don't think that he needs Roxy balloons, action figures, and stuffed characters in order to survive another day. I'm not saying that he shouldn't keep himself alive, I'm just saying that what he's doing is illegal, which is true no matter who you are. And anything I included in those numbers was not a story item, and instead the extra items that you do not need in order to beat the game. And he didn't need to steal Freddy at all. There's no justification for him running off with Freddy other than the fact that they're friends. But then again, it's grand larceny and illegal. One commenter decided to try and provide legal defense for Gregory in a lighthearted manner because that was also the point of the video, so I'd like to reply to Jason Ross's defense for the theft of security badges. Quote from his comment: "While this is technically a crime, I think he could make a strong case with any halfways decent lawyer that he did so out of necessity. He stole stuff to help further his attempts to escape unlawful confinement and other crimes committed against him. Stealing those items he stole was necessary to save himself. He would never have survived the night if he didn't steal." First of all, you just outright admitted that it was a crime, which an actual attorney would have torn to shreds. Secondly, like I've been saying, he could have been hiding the entire time, okay? He would have survived if he had just hid until 6. He doesn't escape any sooner. then 6 a.m. You progressing throughout the game just makes the time go to 6. He never escaped sooner. He did not have to steal the security badges. Unlawful confinement, as you said, is described as whoever wrongfully restrains a person as to prevent that person to move beyond a certain restricted limit is said to have committed the offense of wrongful confinement. However, nobody restrains Gregory, literally, as well. Like, they don't actually time to anything. He gets himself locked in the Pizzaplex. Nobody locked him in there intentionally. The doors close automatically at midnight, and he had plenty of time to leave, but didn't, and he chose to climb inside Freddy, which also ruins your argument against trespassing, which was also wrongful confinement. And for all intents and purposes, in the eyes of the law and any outsiders, Vanessa was actively trying to help him. There are recordings of her claiming to have called the police, which would have been verified certainly, but even if she had called them and claimed something else, the record of her calling 911 would be there. Most of Ross's case relies on unlawful confinement. However, staying in somewhere and then wanting to leave does not constitute unlawful confinement. And to the public, Vanessa was trying to help get him home, but he was avoiding her. We know that she was trying to kill him, but the public doesn't. Now for the biggest issue that everyone seemed to have with this list, the one that I'm sure y'all clicked on this video for. The claim that killing Vanny was murder and not self-defense. And this claim is really the reason I wanted to make this video, because I can't reply to every single comment that was referring to this, okay? Self-defense can be a defense to an assault, battery, and criminal homicide because it always involves the use of force. Most states have special requirements when the defendant uses deadly force in self-defense. Deadly force is defined as any force that could potentially kill. An individual does not have to actually die for the force to be considered deadly. Examples of deadly force are the use of a knife, gun, vehicle, or even bare hands when there is a disparity in size between the two individuals. Or, in this case, the use of animatronic robots to kill Vanny, as Gregory does in the phaser blast ending, which would also set a precedent for robots being counted as deadly force. To successfully claim self-defense, a defendant must prove 4 elements. First, with exceptions, the defendant must prove that he or she was confronted with an unprovoked attack. Second, the defendant must prove that the threat of injury or death was imminent. Third, the defendant must prove that the degree of force used in self-defense was objectively reasonable under the circumstances. And fourth, the defendant must prove that he or she had an objectively reasonable fear that he or she was going to be injured or killed unless he or she used self-defense. The Model Penal Code defines self-defense as justifiable when the actor believes that such force is immediately necessary for the purposes of protecting himself against the use of unlawful force by such other person on the present occasion. Okay, so I'm willing to admit that the attack was certainly unprovoked. Vanny did not need to come after him in order to get him out of the Pizzaplex. However, that second issue, the proof of threat of injury or death was imminent, is where things get complicated. At no point in the game does Vanny directly threaten Gregory with any words. Her voice lines include, "See you soon," "Disassemble Freddy," "There you are you having fun yet?" "Laughter," and "Let's have some fun." While menacing, none of these involve a direct threat. At no point in the game does she brandish a knife or even send the security bots after Gregory to disassemble him. She only sends the 3 main ones to collect him, who also make no appearance in this ending, therefore do not count. Yes, when she catches us we get a game over screen, but that's just us losing the game. That isn't necessarily us being killed. Us thinking that we get killed is simply an assumption because we don't see what happens next. However, in this case, since we made it to the end, Gregory had never been caught by Vanny. While yes, she does end up destroying an animatronic, it was just an animatronic. That's not really a threat on Gregory. Now, let's skip point number 3 for a minute and then move on to point number 4. That the defendant must prove that he or she had an objectively reasonable fear that he or she was going to be injured or killed unless they used self-defense. While yes, Gregory is a child, or seemingly a child, who would have a more extreme view of the world, he literally spent 6 hours running and hiding from Vanny, where he ended up surviving. In fact, he was right at the Pizzaplex door to leave, but instead of leaving, he chose to go after Vanny, thus turning this act of possible self-defense into a possible act of vigilantism, or even turning Gregory into the aggressor. He and Freddy went to confront Vanny. He says himself, maybe that they can catch her in her room at Phaser Blast. Gregory could have left and survived, but chose not to, meaning that he cannot claim self-defense in an altercation that he created. And now for the final point. The defendant must prove that the degree of of force used in self-defense was objectively reasonable under the circumstance. Now, being a child, there is a leeway as to what he would deem reasonable force, but in this case, it is absolutely not reasonable force. We see how destroyed Freddy is after he gets disassembled, okay? His chest and torso are gaping open. He had his insides ripped out. And then he even ends up dying in an animatronic sense, even though his body and his head have been shown to work separately. And then Gregory orders the same thing done to Vanny, a human who would be alive as the animatronics ripped her ribs and intestines from her body. Does that sound reasonable to you? Because killing in self-defense is easiest to claim when the death you cause is quick or painless. But Vanny suffered, and suffered hard. Even criminals on death row do not get this treatment. A serial killer with more kills than Vanny would just get the simple 2-dose lethal injection, where the first dose actually is intended to dull the pain of the second dose. Under absolutely no circumstances would Vanny being torn apart so badly that the comic panels won't even show it be considered the proper amount of force. Especially when he could have said anything to stop or break or even kill. He could have just said kill. This is absolutely over the top, especially given that Gregory seems to have known her if he is indeed Client 46, which is also hinted at during the Princess Quest ending, but since that's a different ending, that doesn't really count here. Which, if he was Client 46, that would have appeared in court. So what kind of charges in Juvenile Time is Gregory facing because of this? Well, if Gregory had Mac Murdock as a lawyer, let's say, or as someone who's also a really good lawyer, they could possibly argue that this would rather be manslaughter than murder. However, Gregory knows what disassemble means, so an argument that this was an accident would be very tough to pull off. But looking at the minimum sentence, there are 3 possible outcomes for how he'd be treated. 1, the child is so young or mentally incompetent to not understand what they've done and are excused for criminal and civil liability from their actions. Not the case for Gregory, who knew full well what was going on the entire time throughout this game. 2, the child is old enough to understand what they have done, but not old enough or lacking in evidence of sufficient premeditation to charge them as an adult, so they are charged and tried as juveniles, which could be the case for Gregory and is the most likely outcome. And then 3, the child is old enough to understand what they have done and there is evidence of planning and premeditation such that they can be deemed to have acted as an adult might, and they are charged as an adult, with the exception that minors may not be sentenced to death. Now, this could be the way that the courts decided to go, since after all, Gregory did intend on confronting Vanny, since he could have left the Pizzaplex but instead went after her. If he is Client 46 as well, the images of him breaking into the Pizzaplex before could be interpreted as premeditation, especially if he was investigating the Pizzaplex because of Vanny. The state could also argue that his intention was always to kill her. So, with these rules in mind, we will look at a minimum and maximum sentence. The minimum would be a manslaughter charge. However, unlike murder, manslaughter does not carry an automatic sentence of life imprisonment. It remains, however, an opinion for the court. But looking at the situation, things wouldn't look too good for Gregory. A 9-year sentence, which is not uncommon, would allow the offender to be paroled after serving 3 years of their sentence. If a firearm is involved in the offense though, a minimum sentence of 4 years is required. And while the weapon was not a firearm, it could be argued that since she was a distance from him, that it could also be considered similar. So at least Gregory would be looking at 3 to 9 years for manslaughter. If he was charged with murder, however, he would absolutely be tried as an adult. And since this is the worst case, we'll go with first-degree murder, since the court could consider this planned and deliberate. Those convicted of first-degree murder all receive the same sentence: life imprisonment with parole eligibility after 25 years. A 20-year-old convicted of first-degree murder will be eligible for parole at the age of 45, and if they behave themselves, then they're likely to receive parole. But considering Gregory's personality and your comments on that top 10 video, I doubt that he'd admit responsibility, show remorse. He doesn't seem like that kind of person. Although after 25 years, he may start looking at things differently, with new eyes, if you will. This is also if he ends up actually aging because he's a real human and not a robot like we're all thinking. And if he doesn't age, a whole new investigation is gonna happen. So let's not get into that. There we have it, friends. Definitive proof that Gregory is a criminal and did not need to kill Vanny or really steal anything from the Pizzaplex. He puts himself in danger by confronting her instead of leaving, and while yes, in the bad ending he dies, how's he supposed to know that? Okay, it's not like, oh no, if I leave her I'm dead, so I might as well go down swinging. That's not how this works, okay? So don't even try with me in the comments, although I'm pretty sure at least 5 5 of you have already done that. Hopefully now you can see that Gregory is a bad person, and while the lesser of 2 evils, evil nonetheless. Thank you all so much for watching. I have been and shall remain Connor Monroe, and I'll see you in another video.